You're tuned in to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast. I'm your host, Mario. As always, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment for our show so we keep bringing you this great content. Our very special guest this week is Deji. Deji, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mario. So pleased and so honored to be here.
We're honored to have you, and definitely excited to delve in and talk about a few different topics and learn about your story as well.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to share. I'm very excited to, share this. Over the past couple of years, I'm usually the one who asks the questions. So I don't remember the last time I was asked this question.
Love it. So to start, Deji, we normally like to get to know our guests a little bit on the personal side. And so for you, like I know, like throughout your career journey, you have a pretty interesting background.
Yeah.
So like I know, like you've worked in banking, you worked in tech. You were also the CEO of a motorcycle hailing company. Talk to me a little bit about that experience, and then maybe just share a little bit about like how your experiences throughout your career, like what are some of the key learnings that you apply in your real estate business today?
Okay, thank you, man. So my name is Deji, and thanks for calling out some of those experiences. Like the easiest way or the simplest way to explain my experiences, I have a background in tech. I would say I've spent about 10 plus years in tech. Started off in the product management field, working for different organizations. As you mentioned, banking. Did like a couple of years in payments, e-commerce. Spent about 5 years doing that. Resigned, did my business school in Spain and the US. Came back, co-founded a startup, which you mentioned, which is like Uber for motorcycles. And how that came about was primarily because before I moved to Canada, I was in Nigeria, where I'm from. And in Nigeria, the traffic situation, or well, in Lagos, where I lived, the traffic situation is, it's probably something a lot of people here haven't really faced. So the easiest way to explain it is if you go to maybe a densely populated area like Toronto, and you maybe, add like, I would say 20 million people inside Toronto. And while adding 20 million people, you maybe remove all the transportation options. So you take out the streetcars, you take out the TTC, you take out every other transport option, and you have maybe just your vehicles, right? So you can imagine in a small area like Toronto, you add 20 million people, and then you take out the existing transportation options. That's very similar to how Lagos is. Lagos is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. Not so many transportation options that people have. So the consequence of that is when you're going from point A to point B, like you would do here, you could predict how long it's going to spend, like how long it's going to take. You go on Google Maps and it gives you the options. If you go by car, 30 minutes. If you go by train, 50 minutes. That predictability is lost in Lagos. When you're going out, you have no idea when you're going to get to where you're getting to. So a 30-minute trip could take 1 hour. In most cases, a 30-minute trip would take like 2, 3, 4 hours, right? And that's because you're just stuck in traffic. So because of that problem, the solution at the time was to create some sort of ride-hailing platform very similar to Uber. But the vehicles that you call on the app wouldn't be a car, because a car wouldn't solve the problem that I mentioned. What would solve that problem would be a motorcycle that can weave through traffic. So it was essentially a ride-hailing app, for motorcycles, and it was built to solve, transportation problem, to get people from point A to point B faster than they would, originally have gotten, if they were using any of the existing transport options in Lagos.
Wow. That definitely sounds like an essential service, and I think even in Toronto, even though we have Uber, I feel like we need something else that's similar, right? Just given the traffic and commuting out here.
Definitely, comparatively, it doesn't feel that way. But again, if you've lived in Lagos, then it probably wouldn't feel that way. But I imagine that, like living in Toronto, there's obviously like a lot of traffic issues, but it's not even comparable.
That's awesome. And so, like just through that experience and your various experiences, once again, we touched on, are there any specific learnings or skill sets that you developed um, going through that you apply for your real estate business today?
Yeah, so there's one I remember specifically, but I think what I can say is like my journey over the past couple of years hasn't really been very linear. Like in some shape or form, I look back and I maybe question why I chose that path. You know, sometimes I ask myself if, for example, I had spent 10 years doing maybe one thing, right, and I mastered that one thing, I probably would be in maybe a much better position within that one thing. So it could be that, for example, if I had spent 10 years doing just maybe real estate, let's say, just real estate alone, maybe within the real estate space, I probably would be way further than I am versus, spend a few years in tech, did business school, co-founded the startup. So it hasn't really been linear, but for that consequence of maybe not, being in a position of leverage within one industry, what I can say an advantage has been is you pick up quite a lot of valuable skills. And one skill in particular that I know that resonates very strongly with me, that I know I picked up all through that period, has been the concept of branding. And for me, I like branding in particular. I like branding. I like community building. I like, just building not just a personal brand, but also like a corporate brand. I've been able to, really pinpoint the differences and the nuances between marketing and branding. And I prefer branding. And how that started off was when I went to business school. I took a course well, before business school, I was working for a bank. And interestingly, what I noticed was this bank was very successful. Well, not in Canada, by the way. For, for anyone who's thinking, I was working for a bank, very successful bank, like operating in multiple countries, like millions of customers, huge Pan-African bank. And one of their uniqueness was their branding. One of the ways they stood out, and you wouldn't believe it, was their buildings. Like their physical structures, their physical branches were uniquely designed. Like they retained an architectural firm. So their buildings were very audacious, right? So you would see a branch, and rather than the branch just being a standard branch, like every other branch you see, in some cases, maybe the building will be slanting or, something very audacious, very catchy, very unique. Like it's almost like if you're driving around and you see their branch, you would stop and look. And that was the first introduction to branding, how like an entity could differentiate itself from its competitors by just branding. And I was able to see how those things, how playing a long-term game of branding helped in the short-term marketing efforts, right? People were leaning towards the bank because of the branding. Like people will be like, this is a yuppie bank, this is a young focused bank. I like, the level of detail, I like their brand, and I just want to bank with them. I just feel like, I have a connection with them. And I saw that. And by working there, I also saw how that branding also helped with perception, even internally. Like people that were working there were proud to work there. Like a lot of people, even in their dressing, like they would dress to the nines just because of the brand of the bank. So that was, I would say, my first introduction to branding. And then when I went to business school, I saw a course, an elective in brand marketing. And I remember going through that as well. I remember like my case study was Range Rover, and just understanding how like two items could be the same, but if you put, for example, like a Range Rover logo, or you put like a Hermes logo or something, it commands more. Not because the item itself is different, but because the brand. So I just fell in love with branding. And when I co-founded my startup, it was the same, approach I took. It was just, when you say it's just a motorcycle company, right? Like everyone just says, oh, it's just a motorcycle company. But if you look into it, we branded the bikes. Like we actually painted the bikes. So everyone else that we met in the industry before we launched just had standard motorcycles, but when we came in, we said every of our bikes, none of them must be standard. Like when we get a bike, it must be painted. It has to be our color. And when we launched, you can imagine people sitting in traffic and then maybe one or two or three or four bikes pass them by. They don't bat an eyelid, but then a green bike drives past them and they're like, what's that? I've never seen a green bike before. And people started. So when you have one bike, it's okay. When you have like 100 bikes, 200 bikes, and you start seeing green bikes everywhere, it's like, what? Like it gets attention. And, that was the approach that we took, to, get our initial traction. That has also, you'll probably notice, that has also translated into real estate as well, where I got into real estate, got into wholesaling specifically. And as you know, like there's obviously been OGs of real estate that, had social media content. I wouldn't say anyone in Canada was specifically providing content for wholesaling and for off market. Like they might have had it as part of their strategy, but no one was exclusively focusing on that. And then I said, you know what? Okay, I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to start a podcast about it, which is branding. And not only that, I'm going to wear the same thing every single time, which is also branding. And I've done that for over a year now. It's a very deliberate effort. I try to always show up in some sort of branded outfits when I'm going out, when I'm behind camera, just because I'm playing the long game, right? So I would say over the past couple of years, maybe that's one skill set. To answer your question, that's one skill set that I feel I have picked up across the different industries that I've been in that I might not have picked up if I had a linear career that I'm sort of grateful for today.
That's fantastic. And like you mentioned a few things that I love. And so like one, like you talked about, obviously like your path wasn't linear. And I personally think like no one's path really is ever, right? And so being mindful of that and kind of towing that line between being like a generalist versus a specialist and something, I think definitely it is a skill set that's applicable in real estate investing when you think about the various strategies that one could execute on. Obviously depending on their goals and mindset and all of those things. And then to your point, like on the branding piece, like we always talk about on the show, like real estate investing is truly a contact sport, right? And so as you mentioned, like your brand, I think is extremely important, even more so in our industry today, right?
Yeah. I agree with you, man. Like 1,000%. Like, when I say things like, my experience wasn't linear, it's not like I 100% regret it. The lesson that I've taken from that is like, you can always be open to change, but I think being open to change within a somewhat linear and consistent, like framework is, the way to go. So I'll give an example. I started off with wholesaling, right? Now, if I had continued like what I had done in the past, from wholesaling, I would move to flipping. From flipping, I would move to multifamily. From multifamily, I would move to borrow investing. Before you know it, I'll start doing short-term rentals, which is what a lot of people do, right? But I've seen that there isn't really so much value. Well, I wouldn't say valuable. Long term, you probably are building a lot of skills in different areas in real estate, which is fine. And, if you ever want to capitalize on that, you could do like a generic real estate program for people to learn everything, which is fine. But for me, what I prefer to do now, just based off my experience and, my learnings and just seeing that I prefer things to be somewhat linear, is if I start off with wholesaling like I did, right? Then the natural next step would be, okay, now I'm doing branding, but within wholesaling. Now, branding is very different from wholesaling. Like those two are different things. Like the concept of branding, the concept of social media content creation is like a full-time job in itself. But because I'm doing it for wholesaling, it's not like it's completely different. It's a completely different skill set, but within the same linear framework. Now, if I decide to do a coaching program for wholesaling, now coaching is also a separate industry from branding and marketing and social media creation. It's also separate from wholesaling. Those are three different industries. But because it is still for wholesaling, there's still the linear framework, right? People can still tie it together. So that's where I see value, where rather than doing like wholesaling, flipping, borrowing, tech, crypto, and it's like everywhere, it's like if you could still chart a straight line, but have different skill sets around that straight line, it feels like you can stack up your experiences. Like your 1 year experience is actually a leverage for your second thing. And when you do that second thing, the combination of experiences you've had for the first and second thing is a leverage for your third thing, right? If I do flipping today, or if I do, for example, multifamily investing today, chances are that a lot of the experience that I've built during wholesaling might not necessarily be fully usable in multifamily. Versus if I decide to do coaching for wholesaling, everything I've done in the past 2 years is fully transferable to that. So I would actually be more successful if I chose to be a wholesaling coach versus a multifamily investor. So why would I go out of my way to do something that I don't have a higher likelihood of success versus leveraging already what I have done in the past few years to do something that I have a higher likelihood of success. So that's my approach going forward, which is whatever I do now, as long as I find multiple ways to expand across that thing, then I can do it. But I don't ever want to shift where it's like it's a complete deviation where whatever I've done in the past few years feels like a throwaway and I'm not able to leverage it.
I love that advice. That makes a ton of sense. And so, like you mentioned, obviously you started in wholesaling. Like we always like to talk about firsts on the show as well. And so, can you talk a little bit about like your first deal, a high level, like what were some of your learnings as well for our listeners?
Yeah. So, a little bit of timeline here. I came into the country towards the end of 2019. I think November 2019, and then COVID was 2020. So I came into the country. My family was still in Nigeria, so I was here alone. But when COVID happened, I didn't know how to react because, like, my family was in Nigeria, I was here, locked down here, they were locked down there, and I found myself waking up every single day, confined to a room, and I didn't really know like how to like just acclimatize to the country that I just moved into. So one thing I like to do, like I just like to do research. And well, I actually did a lot of Netflix and chill for months, right? And then I got out of that. And I asked myself, hey, I asked myself, I can't keep doing Netflix and chill. Like, what am I going to do after watching all these movies? I think the turning point was I was looking for a Netflix movie to watch. And I had scroll down, and I had watched all the movies. I'm like, bro, like, how could I have watched all these movies? Like, this is not good. So I said, okay, let me do research. Let me even find out. I just moved to this country. Like, I know in Nigeria, like, I know the industries that are popping. I know that tech is a big thing. I was going to do a startup here, but I chose not to. So I was like, outside of tech, like, outside of co-founding my startup again in Canada, what can I do that, is really like worth my time? And then I came across real estate, right? In the West, real estate was a big thing versus where I was coming from in Nigeria, where I didn't really have any knowledge of real estate. And the more I read about it, it was a sizable industry in the West, like in the US and Canada, real estate is like popping. So I was like, wow, a lot of millionaires in the West like have some exposure to real estate. I think this is sick. And then one thing I remember about real estate was I kept hearing about leverage, and not leverage in terms of debt, but leverage in terms of long term. If you play it well, real estate can pay you, right? Where, your activity in real estate should ordinarily decline as you continue to stay in the industry, where you do a lot of active work at the beginning, and then if you play it well over the long term, your work starts to reduce and the assets start to pay you. So I just like that concept of leverage because it was opposite of what I knew, which was startups. With startups, you grind, right? And it's like until you exit, you just keep grinding, right? Yeah, you
Yeah.
could hire people, but with startups, until you grow the startup and make it into something scalable, you don't necessarily like hand off the rein, because it's you that the investors essentially put capital towards. So the concept of startups were like active, while real estate felt like there was a pathway to like maybe chilling on the beach. Now that was just high level my concepts of what real estate was, and I just felt, I think this is a skill set that I should even have and know and learn. Like, I'm in this country, I'm going to be in this country for as long as I can be. So I might as well learn it, even if I wasn't going to do it actively. So I joined the community at the time, which is Cashflow Tribe, the OGs of real estate then. I joined that community and I just started consuming that free content. And I remember my family was maybe like 6 months to come in at that time. This was 2020. I learned a couple of free stuff. And one of the strategies that I learned was wholesaling, right? And the reason why I liked it at the time was the promise then was, okay, quick cash, quick cash, quick cash. And I think at that time, wholesaling was maybe easier. Like, I hear that it was easier because I wasn't doing it then. But from a lot of people that have been wholesaling, like OGs of wholesaling, they say like 2019, 2020, like it was popping, So that was the promise then. And that was what I knew. And people that were teaching it then were like, oh, wow, you're getting deals left, right, and center, making like this amount of money. So I thought, okay, like this is interesting. And the fact that I was an immigrant at the time, just coming in, I thought, what, active income was probably where I should focus on, not necessarily buying something, but like I need to raise my active income first as an immigrant. So wholesaling spoke to me. And also my family was coming and I was like, what, I wanted them to come in and just have a better perception of Canada. Because the truth is, whenever people come from Nigeria or from other countries, like it feels like we're taking a step back coming into Canada, even if Canada is a more developed country.
Yeah.
But most people that come from Nigeria, we come from very senior positions and, we're, I would say, relatively established in our countries. So when, for example, I came in as a CEO, like I was a CEO of a startup, right? So coming in here, yeah, it's a better country, but if I'm not a CEO of a company here, yes, I might be able to like justify it by saying, well, it's a better country, it's a bigger country, I shouldn't be the CEO of a company here. But understand that I was the CEO of a company back home. And people go through that mindset where it's like they were senior managers or they were VPs or they were directors in their countries. They come here and they take a step down in the corporate ladder just to get in. Some even have to drive Ubers and stuff. So that mindset is, for me, I was like, I wanted my family to come in and come into the country not feeling like we were second-grade citizens. I wanted them to come in and understand that, okay, we are coming in here to operate in the same level or at the same level we were operating back home. So if we were operating at a high level back home and we were in the 1%, we need to operate like the 1% here in Canada. So wholesaling spoke to me where if I get a, quick cash, I get a few deals, we are able to show that future of what this could be. So that was one of the reasons why I chose wholesaling. I went back to Nigeria 2020 for a couple of months. I came back February 2021. I would say those 4 months that I left the country, that was when the whole craziness happened, when the prices just shot up. So while I was in Nigeria, I was like, what the hell is happening in Canada? Like the house prices are just going. So I felt a lot of FOMO. I'm like, oh my God, I need to go back. So when I was coming back in February 2021, I came back with a renewed sense of urgency. I felt like I had lost time. I felt like the market was leaving me behind. I was like, wow, I shouldn't have come to Nigeria. I shouldn't have left. So I came with a renewed sense of urgency. So as soon as I came in February, there was a boot camp, that these guys were. So I paid for the boot camp. I'm like, I'm taking action. Like I was so like, bro, like if you had seen me then, I was like ready to go. So as soon as I came back, I just paid for the first boot camp that was available. And then I said, you know what, I'm taking action. So I did a campaign. I put about 3,500 on my credit card. I did a campaign in the Kitchener area, sent out a couple of flyers. Thankfully, I got a deal, which was a 20K deal. So that's what started my wholesaling journey, which is a very interesting story.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and actually, on that note, like I'm not sure. Like we always talk about off market deals as well, and just like tips for that. Um, like for you, like in today's market, like I know you talked about like when you came to Canada, you did the flyer campaigns. Like, what's working for you the most in terms of like finding motivated sellers for off market deals?
Yeah, so this is something that I say quite a lot, where there's multiple marketing channels, and I feel like to a degree, every marketing channel works. For me, particularly, I have spent the most time using flyers. So, I wouldn't be able to speak authoritatively about any other marketing channel because I haven't done it to the degree that I've done flyers, right? So flyers has always been my go-to. But I know that there's other people that, use other strategies like social media, bandit signs. There's a couple of strategies like SEO, PPC, and to a degree, they all work, like if you spend enough time. So, I would say, like, I wouldn't say there's one way to get deals. I'll just say any strategy that you feel like you are able to execute, where you have the right skill sets to execute it, have the right commitment levels, you have the right systems to execute it, then focus on that and don't jump around. So if, for example, you're a tech person, you are a marketer by profession, you are always online, you are a digital marketer, then maybe you want to focus on social media ads, PPC. That would probably be the best way for that person to find off market deals because they already have that skill set. If you are a salesperson, you know how to speak with people. You might prefer actually going through like the door knocking methods and like door-to-door sales. That, like, there are people that have spent years in the door-to-door industry. Like, that's how they cut their teeth. So again, it's really based off your skill sets, your experience. Then choose the marketing channel that works for you, and then just stick with it. Like anything you stick with long term, that's where you are able to master your craft.
Great advice. I love that. And so, taking that a bit further, when you think about off-market deals, like I want to kind of delve into like the psyche of a
Yep.
homeowner
Yeah.
and like why would they even sell privately? So can you talk a little bit about that? And then like what are like for a new investor, maybe trying door knocking for the first time or another tactic? Um, like what are some kind of red flags or like key considerations
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
should be mindful of as they're interacting with homeowners that are potentially looking to sell off market?
Yeah. Fantastic question, man. And we've actually discussed this extensively in our Wholesale Wednesday group. But to answer your question directly, I think, let me say it this way, and not everyone would understand this because not everyone is an immigrant. But if there's an immigrant that's listening to this, the way I explain it is when I was leaving my country or when an immigrant is leaving their country, chances are that there's stuff that you have that you want to sell because you're moving to another country. So in my case, I was coming to Canada. There was stuff I had, like stuff in my house, my car, just stuff that I had in Nigeria that was not coming with me to Canada. Now, I remember that when I was selling those things in Nigeria, my goal wasn't necessarily to get the highest price for them. My goal was to sell them quickly so that I can take the money, add it to whatever I'm coming with to Canada. Now, whether I had an item in Lagos that was worth maybe $1,000 and I sold it for $800, the $200 that I didn't, optimize for actually did not move the needle for me. Like, even if I think about it now, I probably cannot even remember all the items I sold when coming here. But I can remember my experience coming here because my focus was actually coming to Canada, starting a new life, bringing my family here, setting things up here, renting a house here, buying a house here, like what my life was going to be here. I was not really focused about the things I had to let go of in Nigeria. So I might have sold things at discounts just to get them off. Now, it's that same mindset that some sellers have here in Canada where they are more focused on what their next steps are. Like when a seller has a motivation to sell their house, yes, there's a motivation to sell the house, but when you think about the fact that there's also a motivation to move on. Now, what they're moving on to is likely more important than what's holding them back, right? The house is holding them back. That's why they want to sell it, so that they can move on to something. Now, if it's, for example, they're about to get foreclosed on, right? That is a motivation for a seller to sell. Now, they are more interested in being free than being a house or a homeowner or a landlord at that point in time, because the burden for them is, my house is about to get foreclosed on, and they are looking forward to not even having a house. So for them, the house is a burden. They are not in the mindset of, this house is what's this house worth? $1 million. Okay, I want $999. No, they're in the mindset of, I want to be free. This house is a burden. I don't even want to think about the house. This house is not what I'm thinking about right now. You as the investor, you are thinking about, oh wow, this house is dated. It needs flooring. It needs a new paint. I can sell it for this amount off the market. You are the one who is actively looking at making the house better. You are the one who is actively looking at making profit of the house. You are the one who is actively thinking of, what that house is going to make you. Not the seller. The seller is thinking of something else. So the house is a burden to them. So when people say, oh, why did the seller sell to you? Why didn't they ask for the highest price? That's because that's what was valuable to them. Price was not what was valuable to them. What was valuable to them was something else. And that's what you need to find out. But if you speak with the seller who is looking to optimize for price, then what that seller is telling you is that that's what's most important to them. There's no motivation for them to sell this house. They are looking for the best price. They would rather wait an extra 1, 2, 3 weeks or a month to get the best price. They would rather go on the MLS and risk it selling or not selling, not even knowing how much it's going to sell for. They'd rather go with the realtor, optimize for the highest price. Because for them, their most important goal at that time is to sell the house. Yeah. Yes, they might want to do something after selling the house, but their most important goal, what they are sleeping and waking up thinking about, is, I want to sell my house. I want to get the highest price for it. After they sell the house, then they can think of what's next. Those are not the type of sellers that we work with. We work with sellers who their motivation is more than the house itself. Their motivation is from something else. And the house is what is actually holding them or preventing them from actually achieving that thing. So once we find out what that thing is, and we know that, okay, the house is what is holding them back, then we say, hey, let's take this from you, right, at this price. And then for them, it's less about that. It's more about, actually, thank you for allowing me to achieve what I wanted to achieve by removing this burden of me.
I love that you shared that, and it's definitely a great way of thinking about it. That's why I mentioned, I really wanted to kind of delve into the psyche piece, because to your point, it's not always about price, right? And so it's about understanding that seller motivation, and then finding that win-win situation. Right?
Yeah. And I can give an example.
Are there any...
so I put a post out yesterday. There were a couple of investors that reached out to me earlier in the year. I helped them to wholesale a deal outside of Ontario, and it was the same concept. The sellers are investors, they are real estate investors, but they reached out. They said, hey, we need to sell the house, or we need to sell the building. It was a multi-family building. It was 15 units in Nova Scotia. We need to sell the building. We need to sell it fast. At that time, again, they are real estate investors. They know what the ARV of the building would be if it's renovated. They made a logical decision. Do we want to spend the time? Do we want to raise the capital? Do we want to go through the process of renovating this building for 1 year or 2 years, and then go get 15 new tenants, manage them, go through the refinance process, start submitting documentation, get our money back, and say, hey, we birthed this building after 2 years? Do we want to go through that process? No, we don't. We don't really want to go through the process. You know what? Maybe we don't really like this market. Maybe, we don't want the stress. At this point in my life, maybe I want to exit to something else. They made a very logical decision to sell. This was not, oh, the seller didn't know, why did they sell to us? And that's what I keep saying. It is not always about price. When we made the offer, we said, hey, like, this is the price it has to be at to get this deal sold quickly. And they were like, yeah, we know that we're taking a haircut, or we know that we could have done this ourselves, but we don't want to. We don't want to. Like, logical decision. They do not want to. And we helped the sellers. We also the deal. We helped our partners, and it was a win-win for everyone. And wholesaling can be a win-win. It doesn't have to be, oh yeah, we are ripping the seller off. No, like, you are solving a problem. For them, their motivation was not the building. Their motivation was the building was actually a burden. They wanted to do something else. And they said, hey, get this off our hands in the next 1 month, and we'll give you whatever price you want. Simple logical decision. And it was done.
That's fantastic. And like, how did that? I know you mentioned like the deal was in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And like you're collaborating with another investor on that. Like, how did that feel? Just going through that experience.
Okay, so I think I mentioned yesterday that it's I believe it's my first deal outside of Ontario. There's obviously a learning curve all through the process. So in terms of like Nova Scotia laws, the contracts were the biggest piece. How to even assign a deal. Like, the contracts were just the biggest piece. So the contracts, like the laws, just like the lawyers we worked with, there's just a difference with like the lawyers, like a lot of differences. So there's obviously that learning curve, a lot of growing pains, but I think it was necessary because it was the first time I was doing it in another province, right? So I would say, as with everything, like doing something for the first time, there's an expectation that it would come with growing pains. Thankfully, the deal didn't delay. Like, there were a lot of issues because, again, it's a new province. I didn't really know the nuances of how to like handhold the deal to the end, but I made up for that with like working with our partners, and we were overly communicating with like almost every day, like I think a week to closing, or like a week and a half to closing. Almost every day we were on calls, like always on calls with the seller, with the buyer, just always on calls, sending emails. I probably brought out my lawyer. Like, I'm not a lawyer. Like, my wife is a lawyer. My dad is a lawyer. I probably brought out like my legal side so many times during that event, like sending emails, quoting clauses, like just trying to ensure that the deal didn't fall through. So there's a lot that goes in, but it also stems from the fact that it was like my first time and I was overcompensating. I wanted to ensure that I didn't let my ignorance or my gap in knowledge, cost me the deal. So I just went above and beyond to ensure that, even if I was annoying to people, it was just a necessary requirement for us to be in a position where we were not like blindsided.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds like a great experience, and I think kudos to you to being resourceful and like mindful of those things as you went through the process.
Oh man, I would actually say thank you to like all the partners I work with, because again, as I mentioned, I knew nothing about Nova Scotia, but because I was working with people that were in the they knew about the province, they invest in the province, they brought the deal to me. I leaned more on them and their own understanding of the market, and a lot of their feedback was what actually helped me to make better decisions. Like, I would, if I was doing this myself in Nova Scotia without having any context, I probably could have lost the deal. But their guidance, their market knowledge, giving me like the right information to be able to make the right decisions. Like, I think it was just more of a collaborative effort. So, like, the thanks, go to them, not me.
That's awesome. And so, like, we've obviously talked about like a variety of different topics. I definitely appreciate you sharing your experiences. To end off our interview today, given what you know now, like from a real estate investing perspective, and just through your various experiences, if you were to take a time machine and go back and speak to Deji of old or in the past, 10 years ago, outside of obviously buying real estate sooner when it was however cheap it was way back when, like, what advice would you give yourself?
Maybe one word, I would say patience. And that is more for me, right? One of the mentorship groups that I joined as part of my real estate journey was the first time I actually did like an assessment, like a personality assessment. Like, I've come across some of them, like all these assessments, but this was the first time that I did one very like diligently, and I really wanted to understand what that meant. And the personality feedback that I got from the assessment, I personally think it spoke to me. Like when I read it, I was like, wow, like I resonate with a lot of these things. Like in my experience, I've seen myself doing a lot of the things that this, assessment has said, this personality type is known for. So that was the first time there was a science-based assessment of like the actions that I've been taking and how I feel. And, just for context, I'm very, like in a very simple term, maybe you could call me a go-getter. Like I like to take action. In some cases, sometimes I take more action than I should. In some cases I make decisions and like I move with it and not necessarily plan extensively. Now, if I go back, when I say patience, if I go back, I wouldn't change it in the sense that when I want to make a decision, I'm going to like do analysis paralysis and wait. No. What I've learned is I'm coming across a book. I haven't read the book, but it's this book, I think Rocket Fuel or something, where like it speaks about, an integrator and a visionary, where like there's people that their personality types is they have a vision, they 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 see where they want to be in like 5-10 years, they are living in that vision, but they're not necessarily able to come out of that vision and do like the day-to-day to actually get there. But there's also integrators that they are more skilled in taking a vision, mapping out the steps that is required for that vision to be materialized, and every single day the steps that are needed, those reps, consistently they are able to put it in place, track, measure, and the combination of those two people actually, that's where you want to be. And I've seen, again, I've not read the book, but I want to read the book. But I've seen a lot of references where they've quoted like multiple big organizations that the partnerships that have been formed that way, they've been helpful. For example, like Steve Jobs and Wozniak, and just a lot of things like that. So I'm starting to find that maybe that's where I want to be. Before, I was taking action myself. I was like a solo person doing stuff myself. But I find that there wasn't maybe the complementary aspect of someone to maybe take the vision and say, okay, this is how we actually make it work. Like, so I'll definitely say patience, patience to like identify, okay, what needs to be done. Not necessarily stop or still take action, but, take action in a more measured way. And, maybe also take action by working with, people that, are able to operate at that level. Right. So, that's what I'll say. Right. And, I mentioned earlier, like we have a group that like we're looking to help active investors, get off market deals on their contracts. And, hopefully that is a combination of everything that we've been doing over the past couple of years in real estate.
That's fantastic, and definitely wise words to live by. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, man.
So before I let you go, like, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you? Like, I know you mentioned your show, so definitely plug it, promote it. Like,
so the best way, well, personally, like I'm most active. Well, like I'm active on a lot of platforms. So, like on social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, like the Deals Estate brand is on all those platforms. We have a YouTube channel, we have an Instagram page, we have a Facebook page, we have a TikTok account. So, anyone who wants to follow us for content, they can find us there. More importantly, where anyone can connect with us directly is through like the Wholesale Wednesday community that we're building. I had mentioned that earlier. It is a free Facebook group. We're actually doing a 12-week challenge. And what we are doing is we are helping active real estate investors to get an off-market or a discounted off-market deal under contract on their own, using like a 12-week structured program. And, I would say that's the best way for anyone to connect with us.
That's fantastic. Deji, thank you so much for making the time once again, for sharing your experiences. It's been
Thanks,
extremely
Mario.
valuable. And yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, man. I really appreciate the platform, and I hope everyone who listened to us today, picks one or two things. So happy to share my experience.
Awesome. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast.